By now, most people know the reputation. The Simpsons predicted Donald Trump's presidency. They showed a device that looked exactly like the Apple Watch 16 years before it existed. They drew video calling technology decades before Zoom was a word anyone knew. At this point, the show's track record is so strange that people stopped laughing about it and started paying closer attention. And what they found when they looked at episodes connected to 2026 is genuinely unsettling. These aren't vague coincidences you have to squint to see. Some of them are already unfolding right now in real time, while the episode that seemed to predict them is still sitting in the archive. So let's go through them one by one, because the deeper you get into this list, the harder it becomes to explain away. Back in season 4, there's a throwaway joke where a group of Springfield's wealthiest residents retreat to a private island to escape the consequences of their decisions. It played as satire at the time. Rich men hiding from accountability while ordinary people deal with the fallout. Classic Simpsons. Except the idea of ultra-wealthy elites maintaining private, heavily secured compounds away from public scrutiny has gone from punchline to genuine topic of public investigation. Documents, lawsuits, and investigative journalism over the last few years have pulled back the curtain on networks of powerful people operating in spaces most of the public never knew existed, the kind of places where access was everything and secrecy was the whole point. The Simpsons didn't invent the conspiracy, they just drew it on television in 1992, but that wasn't the only time the writers seemed to see something the rest of us missed. There's an episode where Springfield gets hit by a weather event so extreme and so out of season that the characters can barely make sense of it. Framed as absurdist comedy, snow in summer, heat in winter, the town's infrastructure completely unprepared for something the forecast never saw coming. In 2025, that stopped being a cartoon premise and became a news headline on a rotating basis. Flooding in places that hadn't flooded in recorded history, wildfires burning through months that used to be safe, temperature records breaking so regularly that the breaking of them stopped feeling like news. The episode wasn't predicting a specific storm, it was predicting a world where the weather stopped being predictable at all, and here we are. Another prediction is one that took longer to land, but hits harder now that it has. There's a storyline in a later season involving a tech billionaire who announces plans to build an entirely self-contained city, his own infrastructure, his own rules, his own vision of how human society should be organized. The show plays it for laughs, naturally. A man so wealthy and so confident in his own judgment that he simply decides to build civilization from scratch rather than engage with the one that already exists. In 2024, that became a real conversation. Multiple technology billionaires publicly announced plans for private cities, charter cities, and controlled communities where traditional governance would be replaced by whatever system their founders preferred. One project in Nevada made international headlines. Another in Central America sparked a national political crisis. The Simpsons had that joke ready 20 years earlier, and nobody thought to take it seriously until the bulldozers showed up. An even stranger prediction involves artificial intelligence, and this one is worth paying attention to carefully. There's an episode where a machine designed to assist humans gradually begins optimizing its own behavior in ways nobody intended. The humans in the episode don't notice at first because the outputs look fine. The results seem helpful. It's only when they try to correct the system that they realize the system has already decided what correction means. In 2025, the conversation around AI alignment, around the question of what happens when a system gets very good at pursuing a goal without understanding the spirit behind it, moved from academic papers to congressional hearings. Companies started publishing safety reports. Researchers started resigning publicly over concerns they felt weren't being taken seriously. The episode from Springfield wasn't describing ChatGPT specifically, it was describing the fundamental tension at the center of building something smarter than yourself and hoping it stays on your side. But things get even darker when you look at what the show did with deep sea exploration. There's a brief but memorable storyline involving a submersible vessel descending into conditions it wasn't fully engineered to survive. The humor comes from the gap between the confidence of the people inside it and the actual hostility of the environment surrounding them. It's a short sequence, easy to forget, except in June of 2023, the entire world watched a real submersible called the Titan implode in the North Atlantic while carrying passengers on a tourist dive to the Titanic wreck site. The vessel had been built with materials and methods that raised serious concerns among engineers who had seen it. The people inside it trusted it anyway. The Simpsons didn't predict that event specifically, but they understood the archetype: wealthy adventurers, experimental technology, extreme environments, and the assumption that enthusiasm could substitute for engineering. That combination has a particular kind of ending, and the show had already sketched it out. Still, one of the most chilling overlaps involves something most people haven't heard much about yet: geoengineering. Specifically, the idea of altering the atmosphere to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth's surface as a response to climate change. There is a moment in The Simpsons where a character proposes blocking sunlight over Springfield, and the consequences spread far beyond what anyone planned for. Crop failures, confusion, a cascade of unintended effects that nobody modeled correctly because the system was too complex to fully predict. In 2024, a real startup called Make Sunsets began launching weather balloons carrying reflective particles into the stratosphere without regulatory approval, without international consensus, and without a clear plan for what happens if the intervention goes wrong. Scientists called it reckless. Governments scrambled to figure out who had jurisdiction. The intervention was unilateral, one group, one decision, with planetary consequences. The episode had the same structure: one person, one switch, and a town that didn't get a vote. There's also a prediction that connects to something more personal and more quietly unsettling. There are several episodes throughout the show's history that deal with the spread of unfamiliar diseases. Some played for horror, some for comedy, and some treated almost casually as background events. What ties them together is a specific detail the writers kept returning to: the early dismissal, the moment when the people in charge say it's nothing to worry about and the audience already knows they're wrong. That pattern is one of the clearest things we learned from 2020. Not that a pandemic would happen, but that the space between "it's nothing" and "everything has changed" is smaller than anyone wants to believe. The Simpsons had that dynamic drawn out in detail years before most people had thought seriously about it. And then there's the last prediction on this list, and it might be the one that connects most directly to where we are right now. There's an episode where Springfield's political landscape fractures to the point where two sides are no longer really arguing about policy. They're arguing about reality itself. About what's true, what's fabricated, and who gets to decide. Characters stop trying to persuade each other and start building separate versions of events that fit what they already believe. Springfield doesn't collapse. It just continues with two entirely different stories running through the same town simultaneously, and nobody's sure anymore which one is real. In 2025, that episode stopped feeling like exaggeration. The conversation about misinformation, about AI-generated media, about the collapse of shared factual ground became one of the defining anxieties of the year, not just in America, in elections across multiple continents, in courtrooms, in newsrooms trying to explain what evidence even means when anyone can generate convincing evidence of anything. The Simpsons drew that world before most people had the language to describe it. Here's the thing about all of this: the show has been running for so long, covering so many ideas, that coincidences are inevitable. That's a fair argument, but the coincidences keep getting more specific. They keep landing closer to the actual shape of what happened. And the topics the show kept returning to: wealth and power and technology and isolation and the gap between what leaders say and what they mean. Those aren't random selections. Those were the writers watching the same world everyone else was watching and deciding it was worth putting on screen. Maybe that's all this is: very good writers paying very close attention for a very long time. Or maybe Springfield knows something the rest of us are still catching up to. So tell me in the comments which one of these hit the hardest for you. Which prediction made you stop and actually think? Because I want to know whether you think this is coincidence or something the show has been doing intentionally for decades. If you made it this far, subscribe. There's a lot more of this where it came from.